Okay, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. So all this stuff is up on Moodle. In an effort to try to be a better communicator and evolve into new teachings and stuff, this is all new. This is all new stuff that the material isn't new, but how I'm delivering it is new. Back in the day, I used to just lecture and people would write down stuff, come on, come on. But now I could see that it would be better if I gave you the main thing, so that way you can listen to the scenarios and we could try to make some use of this stuff. The 310 analogy that I like to give is cards. If you're playing cards, whatever your game, there's infinitely many hands you can get. But if you know how to play the game, then it doesn't matter what hand you get, you know how to play. Okay. So the muscles that influence the cervical vertebra. Reminder from 310 real quick. Cervical movement is independent of trunk, even though it's the same skyscraper. That I can move my 7 cervical, but once I start to get to ribs, that's what becomes thoracic. So I can't independently move the stuff once I get to T1, okay? So all of these muscles that we're going to talk about are just ones that pull in specific directions of motion at the neck, right? Remember, we're not going to learn muscles do specific motions, because that will get us into trouble with isometrics. It'll get us into trouble with eccentrics and even stretching. We need to be able to see, how would I stretch the muscles on the left side of my neck, right? Wouldn't I want to bend to the right to stretch the ones on the left? So our verbiage is going to be very universal to all of these different ways that we're going to apply it, not just for concentric contraction, where this muscle does this specific motion. Okay. So what I did is, straight up, I just told you the 4 major muscles that I'm going to hold you accountable for in the neck. We have the right and left sternocleidomastoids and the right and left erector spinae. I'm going to show you pictures. I'm going to explain how they pull. I'm going to explain how they work. We'll get into some little tricks and quips of these multifunctional muscles. How do you isolate? How do you stretch? How do you make a computer not stop showing after 2 minutes? So we're going to do all this stuff. But the first thing I did is, bam, these are the muscles you're accountable for. And these are the directions of their pull. This is how they pull. Notice there's no motion, because motion is going to correspond with contraction, or motion doesn't even have to be contraction. Look, guys, watch this. Relax all my muscles. I had flexion, but it wasn't because something yanked it down or something like, right? So we can't just say if I see a motion, it's because of these muscles. However, in all circumstances, in anatomical position, these are how these muscles pull all the time. 100%. Isometric, concentric, eccentric, stretch, at rest. When you die, this is how these muscles pull all the time. Does that make sense? So for this first one, I went even more into redundancy. I'm not going to do this on the follow-up ones, but the right sternocleidomastoid is a cervical flexion puller or a flexor. It means the same thing, a flexion puller or a flexor, a right lateral bending puller or a right lateral bender, left transverse rotation puller or left transverse rotator. Like, think of it as like a Laker plays for the Lakers, right? Does that make sense? Like, so when we say flexor, that doesn't mean it's doing flexion. That means it's part of a group that pulls in that direction. Does that make sense? It pulls that way. Elevator pulls up, even when it's letting you down. Still pulling, it's doing its job by pulling up. Okay, remember all that? All right. First thing we're going to get into are these isometric practice problems for agonists. Don't think muscles right now. If you push in the back of your head, that push is trying to flex your cervical vertebra, right? The last thing you want are muscles that are also pulling in that direction. If you're trying to flex your neck, wouldn't you need muscles that are trying to extend your neck? Your agonists, the muscles that are doing a job, would be your cervical extension pullers, or we call them cervical extensors. This chapter, or this part of class, is just going to say, that's cool. Who are those muscles? Who's on that team? Who's in that group? Who are those specific muscles that are pulling in the back because I need them to do a job? I need cervical extensors in this picture. I need cervical flexors in this picture, right? Trying to extend, ooh, that was loud. Trying to extend, wouldn't I need muscles that are pulling in a direction of flexion? I need flexion pullers. Who are those muscles? I'm going to teach you how to see those muscles that are pulling forward. I'm going to teach you how to see the ones that are pulling in the back. I'm going to teach you how to see the ones that would be pulling left ear, left shoulder, or we call them our left lateral cervical bending pullers, our left lateral cervical benders. And here I would need our right laterals. 310? Cool. Notice, no motion. There's no motion in these isometric scenarios. But yet I know I need certain muscles to prevent me from doing this, or prevent me from doing this, or this, or this, right? Okay. Let's talk about it. So the four main muscles that I'm going to hold you accountable for. There's going to be a lot of semantics when we first get started, so please feel free to ask questions or follow-up questions. Think of it like this. In basketball, baseball, football, a lot of scenarios. In football, you have wide receivers, plural, but one might be an X, one might be a Y, one might be a Z. We have wings in basketball. One might be on the right side, one might be on the left side. So in this class, we're going to have sternocleidomastoids, plural, but one is going to be on the right side, the other is going to be on the left side. So it's like the wings in basketball, the wide receivers. It's like a group, but they're individual players in that position group. Does that make sense? Okay. This one gets a little weird, so I'm going to try to explain it here. You have a lot of muscles that help to erect your spine or maintain a position so that gravity doesn't flex your neck or flex your trunk. In fact, it should make sense that you have so many because we're upright so much. We need a lot so that we don't get tired as often. We need a lot of redundancy up our spine so that we don't get fatigued. Heck, hold your arms out for a few seconds, you start to get tired, right? So erecting your spine for an extended period of time, it makes sense that we need a lot of help. Because you have a ton of little muscles, intrinsic little muscles between the vertebrae, these extrinsic spinalis, iliocostalis, longissimus, these little rotaries, you got a bunch of them. Bless your hearts, some of you may learn what those little individual muscles are in graduate school, but not all of you will. And so for this class, because you have so many of them, we're going to group the group. We're going to have an erector spinae group made up of a bunch of little and big muscles that are on the right side of the spine, and we're going to have a group on the left side of the spine. The spine is like the Great Wall. It's like a border. Muscles do not cross over into the spine. So literally the spinous processes, we have stuff on the right side and stuff on the left side, and they do not crisscross, okay? So the four muscles, and again, guys, I'm going to show you how they work. We're going to talk about their origin and their insertion, although that's not important for function. But I'm giving you, I'm explaining the cards that we're going to play with, and then we'll play, okay? So you have a right erector set, a left erector set, right erector, left erector. Can those two work together? Absolutely. You could run a route with both wide receivers, but they don't have to. You independently innervate them. Right side, left side. They are separately innervated. You also have these sternocleidomastoid muscles. That sounds like a mouthful, but it's really not. It tells you origin and insertion. A lot of these muscles do that. So the sternocleidomastoid starts off, some of it on your sternum, some of it on your clavicle. That's what cleido means, clavicle. So it has a dual origin on sternum and your proximal clavicle, and it goes to your mastoid process. Guys, your mastoid process is basically by your ear. Your mastoid process by your ear. So it runs from your sternum and the farthest part of your clavicle to your ear. So wouldn't that make sense that these two muscles would be trying to pull your ears forward? Flexion pullers. Check this out. Both of them together, flexion pullers. But if I let go of the left side, the right side wants to pull right ear, right shoulder. If I let this side go, left ear would want to pull left ear, left shoulder. That makes sense? And then I'm going to get to the transverse because that was a little freaky, but it should hopefully make sense. That's it. Do you have more muscles? Yeah, you have scalenes, you have, but for the purposes of what I'm trying to teach you, not to associate specific muscles with specific motion, this is a great way to start. Think of it like this. Y'all ever heard of like muscles most involved prime movers? You ever heard that term? That's what we're going to emphasize here. Okay. All right. So your sternocleidomastoids, the reason I like these two pictures, and you could use any, if you want to Google more pictures, that's cool. Two-dimensional photos sometimes are hard to understand three-dimensional concepts. Seeing a bicep from the front, super simple, because the biceps is going to do this, right? But some of these muscles pull in 3 dimensions, meaning sagittal pull, frontal pull, and transverse pull. So picking a 2-dimensional view gives you certain visuals of some of them, but it doesn't give you all. So that's why I tried to have multiple pulls. So let's look at this erector spinae. Obviously, it's in the back, so it's going to have a posterior moment, torque, at the cervical vertebra, pulling the ears back. That's easy to see, right? Extension pulling function should be easy to see. Cool? Right side, it should be easy to see the frontal plane. Right ear, right shoulder pull, left ear, left shoulder pull. So the right erector spinae is going to be a right lateral cervical bending puller, or it's in the group of right lateral cervical benders. It's a right lateral cervical bender, meaning it pulls that way. The left is going to be a left lateral pull. It pulls that way all the time. Guys, when you're sleeping, there's still tone in your muscle at resting tone. It's pulling that way. What we're trying to avoid is, I see flexion, must be my sternocleidomastoids. No, it's my erector spinae, because gravity is trying to flex me. So if I do that flexion eccentrically, it was actually the muscles in the back that lowered me down like an elevator cable. That's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid, I saw flexion, must be these. Does that make sense? I'm going to keep repeating it. Keep repeating it. This is why I have this picture. The transverse pull of our erectors. So what I want you to notice is part of our erector group has some obliquity to it, if we remember from our trigonometry functions. Obliquity, angle. The erector spinae at the back, the analogy I give is, who was a bad kid growing up? I'll admit it. Okay, but look at us now, right? But look at us now. We get better. But I was a bad kid, and my mom was an ear puller. I don't know if anybody else's mom was an ear puller. Man, my mom was mean. If my mom was behind me and I didn't notice and I was doing something bad, and she grabbed my ear on the right side and pulled posteriorly towards the back, wouldn't she be pulling in a direction of right transverse cervical rotation? She would be a right transverse cervical rotation puller. Does that make sense? That's what your erector spinae does back here. It's trying to pull by your ear, by layman's terms, it's trying to pull the right side back. So the right erector spinae would be a right transverse puller, and thus the left erector spinae would be a left transverse puller. So far, so bad? How would you stretch the erector spinae? Well, they're both extension pullers, so you'd want to flex to stretch both of them. But if I wanted to isolate, let's say you were really tight on one side or the other. Let's say you were really tight on the right side. Well, knowing that the right side pulls to the right laterally, wouldn't I want to bend to my left? So to really get it, I'd want to flex and bend to the left. You see how these combinational things, you can stretch it sagittally and stretch it frontally. And you could stretch it transversely. If it's trying to pull right ear, right shoulder back, when I want to look to the left, I'd stretch it even further. So these concepts are going to help you in therapy and in allied health and even coaching, because you'll be able to see isolation based on some of these muscles that pull in different multiple directions. Okay? So the erector spinae, if I say them like plural, like what does the erector spinae do as a group of a group? Well, both of them are cervical extensors. Both of them pull in the direction of cervical extension. True? Guys, that's the only thing they do together. They pull in opposite directions frontally, and they pull in opposite directions transversely, which is cool because that means when they're working together, they cancel out each other side to side, and they cancel each other out transversely. That should make sense. So when we're just talking about one or the other, we're going to say the right or the left. And when we're talking about them together, we're just going to say them plurally, the erector spinae. Make sense?
You said they were opposite. You said they were opposite, transverse and
frontally, correct. So look, what that means is that if my head was a teeter-totter, right side is pulling this way, left side is pulling this way. And transversely, right side. Now, I can't get back there, so I'm going to use thumbs for arrows. Right side is pulling this way, left side is pulling this way. Right pulls to the right transversely, left pulls to the left. So the erector spinae is actually easier to learn than the sternos. I'm going to teach that in a second, because right transverse and right lateral line up. Right lateral and right transverse. Left lateral puller and left transverse. The sternos don't line up, but I'm going to explain why. So those are your erectors. Let's get to function of your sternos, sternocleidomastoids. Remember, a lot of syllables, but all it is your origins and your insertions of the muscle. First one should make sense. If I'm pulling my ears forward, it'd be a flexion puller, both of them, right and left. So how would I say them both? Sternocleidomastoids, plural. So erector spinae is kind of like deer. Like the plural of deer is deer. Erector spinae, plural. Right would be a singular, left would be a singular. Sternocleidomastoids would be right and left. The only thing they do together is pull in the sagittal plane. They're flexion pullers, pulling the ears forward. I think you guys understand what I mean when I say pulling the ears forward. They're not attached to the ears, but they're attached to a place that's super close to the ears. Okay? Right side, right ear, right shoulder pulls in that direction, so a right lateral, and the left side, left lateral. Let's stop there. The right sternocleidomastoid, now you should see, whoa, it has something in common with the right erector spinae. Both of them are trying to pull in a direction of right lateral. The left sterno and the left erector have something in common. They're both trying to pull in the direction of left lateral. So in other words, if I was on my right side and gravity is trying to bend my head to the right, wouldn't I need muscles that are pulling to the left laterally? Who are those muscles? Left sterno, left erector. They would cancel out sagittally, and I'm going to explain in 1 second how they would also cancel out transversely. I'm going to save that one for last because that's the hardest piece. Right sterno, flexion puller. Right lateral, cervical bender. Left, flexion puller, left lateral. The hardest one to see, but I don't think it's going to be hard. I think you guys are y'all digging the new classroom vibe, or it's still weird? Still a little weird. Still a little weird. Still a little weird for me too. I
think it's good for the video though.
I think you're right. I had to go and buy. So one of the limits, I'm going to take 2 seconds, but we got to move on. I'm limited by the Ethernet connection for the videos. And I didn't know, I don't know anything about tech. And they're like, well, if you get an extension, and I'm like, do we have one? They're like, no. And I'm like, I'm gonna have to go buy one. Huh? They're like, unless you want it like in 2 months. I was like, dang it, my kids need it now. So I went, I put a down payment layaway for a $10 cable. And with my salary, I should have it paid off by August. Okay. Let's open our minds here, guys. I use the analogy that I was a bad kid. I was canaille, mischievous. My mom's behind me. She pulls on my right ear posteriorly to the back. She's pulling in a direction of right transverse. If she pulled on my left ear posteriorly, she'd be pulling in a direction of left transverse. But what if she was right in front of me? If she pulled my right ear forward, it would make me want to look to my left. And if she pulled my left ear forward, wouldn't it make me want to look to the right? That's how the sternocleidomastoids work. The right sternocleidomastoid, okay, look at the obliquity of that muscle. What it's trying to do transversely is say, hey, right ear, come line up with your sternum. So for my right ear to line up with my sternum, I'd have to look to the left, because it's posterior. That muscle runs, yes, bottom to top, but it runs anterior to posterior. So it's going to pull to try to line those things up transversely. So the right sternocleidomastoid is a left transverse cervical rotation puller, or a left transverse cervical rotator. The left is a right transverse cervical rotation puller, or a right transverse cervical rotator. Guys,
think of it like this.
When you stretch a muscle, aren't you moving the joint in the opposite direction of that muscle's pull? Everybody knows the hamstrings pull in a direction of hip extension, right? So when I stretch it, don't I want to flex the hips? Okay. Same concept. Right sternocleidomastoid, sternum, ear hole, mastoid process. What happens when I look to my left? It gets on slack, huh? Because it's not being stretched. When I look to the right, it gets stretched. The reason that's freaky is because we're going to move and we're going to say, well, wait, I feel a stretch on this side. That's your erector spinae. That's your erector spinae. Because remember, when you twist, you're bringing something from the back to the front. So when you look to your left, you're not stretching the right sternocleido. Even though you feel a stretch, that's your right erector spinae being stretched. Your right sternocleido is actually being put on slack. It's getting shorter. You're stretching the left. Left sternocleido is a right transverse cervical rotator, and the right sternocleido is a left transverse cervical rotator. So that should make sense. The erector was clean, right lateral, right transverse. Left erector, left lateral, left transverse. But the right sternos are also right lateral, but a left twisting pulling muscle. Right lateral, left transverse. Left lateral, right transverse. I like to look at it like this. This is primitive, but it works. Thumbs represent kind of the origin. My fingers represent the insertion. My right is trying to pull me to look to the left. And my left is trying to pull to make me look to the right. Okay. Now, we talked about muscles canceling out. I'm going to actually skip over this for a second to show you something I think is really cool. Go to your, I posted it. It's the force couple slide. It should be one of your appendages. Where was it at? It's on unit 3. It should be the last. Perfect. That's exactly it. It should be like a little circle. It's like a merry-go-round. It's a merry-go-round. Where are my physical education majors? When kids are on a merry-go-round, isn't it more fun for the kids if you have 2 adults spinning it, one on each side of the merry-go-round? One adult is going to push in a certain linear direction. The other adult on the other side actually wants to push in the opposite linear direction. But what are they both doing together? They're both trying to spin the merry-go-round the same. That's what a force couple is. A force couple is 2 different linear forces that are actually trying to do the same spin. So look at that little diagram, how I explain how the erector spinae and its ipsilateral, the opposite side sterno, work together as a force couple, like on a merry-go-round. Guys, it's no different than if I had a basketball and I was trying to spin the basketball. Wouldn't I want one hand on the front and on one side and the other hand on the back on the other side? They can cancel out this way, they can cancel out that way, but they can work together to spin. That's all we're talking about. This hand would be like my sterno, and this hand would be like my erector. The sterno is trying to pull my left ear forward. My erector is trying to pull my right ear back. So it's like being in a lot of trouble. And my mom, she's trying to end me. But that's what's happening. If you're trying to look really quick one way or the other, it makes sense that we would have muscles that would cancel out and work together for spin. Cool? All right. Cross-sectional approach to understanding functional anatomy. Some of you will love this. Some of you will take this to graduate school and say, this got me through graduate school with no problem. Some of you are going to hate it with your guts, and both of you is okay. All this is to help you see function of these all muscles. We got a lot of muscles. So all this is a teaching tool to help us see the directions of pull. I will never ask you a circle question on your test, but I'm going to ask you a lot of function questions. Does that make sense? These circles, like I mentioned last class, all it is a cross-section of all the different joints that we have in our body. They're all somewhat circular. And we know from torques and moments that to create a rotational pull, you have to have a moment arm, you have to cross an axis with rotation. So this represents our cervical vertebra, my neck, but I can't show it to you like this, so I have to rotate it on the board like that. However, your device, if your device is flat, it would literally be like you were seeing it here. Does that make sense? Bilateral axis. What motions happen at the bilateral axis? Flexion, extension. So doesn't it make sense that if we have muscles anterior to the bilateral axis, wouldn't they be flexion pullers? And if we had muscles posterior in the back of the bilateral axis, they'd be extension pullers. So muscles that are in the front of the bilateral are going to be our flexors. Notice nowhere in this circle is concentric, eccentric, agate. That stuff we have to figure out. Do I need the flexors, the extensors, the right laterals, the left laterals? But once you identify who you need, the circles helps to remind us who are they? Who are those muscles? Some students, through them, I've learned to almost like highlight. So like we're going to put the muscles in the circle based on their directions of pull. But if you see, oh, I need my flexors, it's almost like this part lights up. Hey, I need these. I need my extensors. Oh, this one lights up. I need my right laterals. I need my left laterals. And then the polar, I like to look at that as resets. Ooh, I need muscles that are trying to spin my merry-go-round to the left or spin my merry-go-round to the right. Make sense? So what do we know about the right sternocleidomastoid? It's a flexion puller, meaning it's going to be in the front. It's a right lateral cervical bender, This is our AP axis of our neck. Right side, left side. True? So we know that that muscle is going to be in the front of the red and to the right of the blue. It's going to live in this quadrant. And then for PE, we know that the right sterno is going to pull in the direction of left transverse. So it's going to try to spin the merry-go-round to the left. Look what that would look like. Comme ça. Look how clean. Bless you. So if all you did, remember last class I said if I asked you, if I give you bonus points to name every person and that was in your class in high school or something, you probably wouldn't go off of a memorized list. You'd probably be like, who sat in front of me, who sat behind me, who sat on the left, who sat on the right. Also, if you memorized all of this, awesome. But think about the redundancy. Redundant. Redundant. Where's my right sternocleidomastoid? Redundancy. You have a ton of redundancy, and sometimes that redundancy gets confusing. Well, this one's a right with that one, but it's a this with that one. It's on multiple teams. But if all you did was learn how those muscles cross the joint, you don't have to be redundant. Everything is explained in this one picture. The right sternocleidomastoid is a cervical flexor, a right lateral cervical bender, and a left transverse cervical rotator. The left sternocleidomastoid is a cervical flexor, a left lateral cervical bender, and a right transverse cervical rotation puller. The right erector spinae is a cervical extension puller, cervical extender, a right lateral cervical bender, and a right transverse cervical rotation puller. And the left erector spinae is a cervical extender, left lateral, and a left transverse. Remember, all this is here for is to help remind you of pull so that you can do stuff like this. Who are the major muscles that pull in the direction of cervical flexion? Those are going to be the ones in the front, left and right sternocleidomastoids. What about my right laterals? That's on the right side. Right sternocleidomastoid, right erector spinae. And then the hard, right, you can do extensors, you can do left lateral, and then the hard one, right, the rotation. You might just be able to see it. Left sterno with right erector, or you could see how they would want to rotate the merry-go-round. Right sterno is going to be a left transverse with left erector. That's how they pull. In addition, these directions of pull help us to see stretch. How do I stretch the left laterals? I'd want to bend to the right. Who are those muscles that I'm stretching? Anything on the left side of the anterior posterior axis. Left sterno, left erector. Who am I stretching here? Well, what's my position? My cervical is rotated to my left. Wouldn't I be stretching the muscles that pull to the right? Do you see how learning muscles on directional pull help us to see all kinds of cool stuff? Who would I be stretching if I looked to the left? The muscles that pull to the right transversely. Who are those muscles? Left sternocleidomastoid, right erector spinae, pull to the right. Do you know why you won't see this in any books? Because I made this. Because my brain sees this. And I would love other students to see this as well. And if 20 years of teaching have demonstrated, a lot of my students love it. However, I'm not going to force you to see something that you don't see. But I can tell you what I'm going to hold you accountable for. Function. Who are my cervical extensors? Who are my right lateral cervical benders? And practical examples that we're going to get to with what muscles, what specific muscles would I be working top left? 310 helps us to identify any of my extension pullers. 415 helps us to say who are those muscles, the ones that are in the back. Left and right erector spinae. Cervical flexors. Who are those? The ones in the front, left and right sternocleidomastoid. Left lateral cervical benders, I need in this one, true. Who pulls that way? Everything on the left side of the cervical. Left sterno, left erector. Who do I need? Right lateral. Who are those? Everything on the right side. Right sterno, right erector. If you memorized lists, I got no problem. But imagine, who do I need? Okay, let me go through. Nope, not there. Okay, that does that. Versus just seeing, who do I need? The stuff on the right side. Who's on the right side? Pa, pa. And that's the sound it makes when the light bulb goes on. This one cross-sectional approach to muscle anatomy tells us so much information. Specific muscles, left erector spinae. One of my patients has a strain of the left erector muscle, so I need to stretch it. Well, knowing how to stretch it is a function of me knowing how it pulls. Does that make sense? Okay, it pulls in a direction of extension. I want to make sure I flex. It's a left lateral, so I need to make sure I bend to the right. And then the hardest one, it's trying to make me look to the left, so I need to make sure I position the neck twisted to the right. None of that stuff is given with left erector spinae neck extension. Sometimes in therapy, and I know this because I was a practicing athletic trainer for about 10 years. That's how I got my school paid for, as a certified athletic trainer. There were times where our doctors, during certain rehabs or injuries, the doctors would say, emphasize this muscle specifically through eccentrics. I got to know how to set that up. Sometimes it would be, okay, we're early in the rehab, just do isometrics, progress to just concentrics, and then do a dynamic. I got to know how to set that up. You will need to know how to set that up, most of it. So let's get to some dynamic exercises, guys. Let's do some of this first. I like this. I took the time to write them all down. Try not to look at this. What is that dumbbell trying to do to his neck? How's it trying to move him? The motion. What's the motion that it's trying to do? Yeah. And we call that what? Right lateral, right? The external force, the load, the exercise is trying to bend his neck to the right. Do you know what muscles you don't need for that exercise? Muscles that are trying to bend you to the right. Does it make sense that we need muscles that are trying to bend his neck to the left? The whole time. We have a name for those muscles, the left lateral cervical benders, the group of muscles that pull in a direction of left lateral. Your cross-sectional anatomy will help to remind you who those muscles are. Ooh, I need left. Bing, I highlight the left side of my neck circle, and I say left sterno, left erector. Now, if I observe left lateral cervical bending, all that tells me is that, oh, cool, it must be concentric contraction. Because the only way the muscles that pull that way are going to make motion happen that way is to shorten while trying to shorten above rest. It's just 310 stuff, but just who are those muscles in that group? That's it.
I have a question.
Okay.
So you said that the picture on the right, because you need I'm trying to say it right. Basically, the one on the right is concentric, so this one will be.
Remember that it's not necessarily a picture on the right, because any picture is isometric. It's here to there.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So here to there. Okay.
Yeah. A to B, start, finish. Yeah. I had to have concentric work from these same muscles to make my head bend to the left when something's trying to make me bend to the right.
Okay.
I see it with agonist, but that doesn't mean you have to see it with agonist. Remember, we're just solving a simple equation. Some of you may see motion first, and that's okay. Watch what would happen if we would go motion. Here to there, left lateral cervical bending. True? Well, heck, that's just motion, so I'll fill that in. All right? What's the load or the weight trying to do while I'm left lateral cervical bending? Ooh, it's trying to bend me to the right. So I had motion from those muscles that I had to make happen in the presence of an external force. So you could see this first, but you still got to come back to identifying the agonist.
That's actually one.
And then agonist in motion tells you contraction.
Okay. I see.
A, B, C.
That's fine.
Just remember, there's going to be no motion in these isometric settings. That's why I started off with these, right? But that's okay. You could say, what was my motion? There was no motion. Great. What was the external force? You still will eventually answer the same questions. Whether you start with what's the external force trying to do, or if you start with motion. I think the reason I like to start with external force is because you got to get to it anyway. Whether there's motion or not, we still got to analyze what is loads or external forces trying to do to me so that I can see who I need to play tug of war against it. So guys, your circles didn't tell you, or your memorization didn't tell you who's working. 310 helped you to see who's working. What your cross-sectional anatomy will do will help you to remind you of all the muscles that you're held accountable for. Once you identify the group you need, who is in that group? Who are the specific muscles? It's no longer flexors, extensors, it's flexors, and these are the two flexors. It's right laterals, these are the two main right laterals. It's I need left laterals, these are the two main left laterals. I need right transverse, these are the two main right transverses. I need a left transverse. These are the two left transverses. Does that make sense? Let's try to work out some of these. External force is trying to do what to his neck? That cable's pulling. It's trying to extend you, right? The cable's pulling. So if the cable's trying to extend you, when you need the flexors, okay? Flexors, great. Who are those? The ones that are in the front, right and left sternocleidomastoids. Contraction is going to be inferred. Once I have all that information, I have my agonist. What's my motion? I see flexion. Flexors do flexion through concentric contraction. True? If my flexors are working above rest and I actually see flexion, that's them winning the tug of war. They're doing what they're trying to do. They're creating motion in the direction of their pull. That's all different ways of saying concentric work. What's the load trying to do here? Wait. Let's go back. Here to there. Same external force. Same agonist. The variation in motion from here to here, wouldn't I have extension? The variation in motion isn't from different muscles. It's the same muscles doing different contractions. That is what Campbell is trying to teach you guys, because that's what so many people, including medical doctors, don't understand. And it's not their fault. They're spending more time on pharmaceuticals than on muscle work. And that's okay. I'd rather a doctor understand what kind of blood pressure medication I need than understand the contraction. That's not their job. But what I'm saying is that my students, kinesiology majors, people that are going to be working with rehab and muscles and contraction and fitness, we have to understand muscles, motion, and contraction. We have to understand. And heck, that's cool. You're going to know something that doctors don't know. That's kind of cool. Same muscles, different motion because of different contraction. Load's trying to flex me here. Guess what I don't need now? I don't need flexion pullers. I need extension pullers. Does that make sense? Where are the extension pullers? In the back? Who's in the back? Right and left erector spinae. Well, I have two different motions. I have flexion and I have extension. Traditional memorization of this stuff would say sternocleidomastoids and then erector spinae. And I'm like, oh, no. It's the same muscles doing different motions through different contractions. You see? Erector spinae, eccentric, concentric. Being lengthened while trying to shorten above rest, or shortening while trying to shorten above rest. Yes, sir.
So the agonist never changed depending on the motion. It's just still the same agonist.
The agonist doesn't change based on what that weight is trying to do to you. Does that make sense? Here we had the same motion as this, but we had different muscles. Why? Because this is trying to extend me and this is trying to flex me. Flexion, flexion. But it wasn't the same muscles, wasn't it? That is the heart and soul of this class, is so that we don't just say flexion must be sternos. Flexion must be sternos. We have to take into the context, who do I need? And then I could see the motion is influenced through the contraction. Does that make sense? Do I got time for one more? What's that?
Yeah, you got time.
Okay.
Only 5.
I still need to find one. What's that? Oh, there it is. I always like to keep a consistent time because sometimes like those things are wrong. Don't worry about circles. Do I need right laterals or left laterals for this exercise?
Right lateral.
Good. Doesn't it make sense? All your circle does is once you identify who you need, who are the right laterals? The stuff on the right side of the cervical vertebra, right sterno, right erector. If I need my right laterals, when I see right lateral, it has to be concentric. But when I see left lateral, it has to be eccentric. Muscles influence movement through contraction. But heavens, this is going to be an old time phrase, heavens to Betsy on the test, here to there. Oh, that's left lateral. Must be these muscles, because that's what this book says those muscles do. They only do that with concentric. And guys, human movement is not just concentric. It's a majority, equal parts, eccentric, and a lot of times isometric. Why don't you go and do the rest? Just these are trying to twist. It's hard to see. But the cable is like on one side and it's trying to rotate him this way, if that makes sense. And this one, the cable would be trying to rotate him that way. So I try to have an example of all of it. Cool? Is this overwhelming?
No, actually.
Good. It'll come, the more we do, the easier it'll get, okay? All right, guys. Y'all have a good day.